Right now, I'm going to look at the books of Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. These are known as the major prophets. You'll have the major prophets, the minor prophets. And these major prophets are taking up a good portion of Scripture. That's why they're known as the major prophets. It's not as if the minor prophets' prophecy had any less of an impact than the major prophets. It's just the sheer volume of the major prophets makes them major prophets. So it's really more about the amount of content than anything else. Okay. So let's look at each individual prophet. First of all, Isaiah, the priestly prophet. As far as the content of the book, here is how the book itself is structured. You have key structural passages. The first 6 chapters deal with judgment for the sins of Israel and the temple vision. And so that's what you're going to find in the first 6 chapters. Then you're going to find prophetic children and historical background in chapters 7 through 12. Then there are the oracles against the nations, a larger look at all the oracles against the nations than you will find in the book of Amos. Amos has oracles against the nations, um, but Isaiah goes into greater detail than Amos does. Then you have the judgment against the whole earth. God is going to judge the earth. That's what you have outlined here. Then you have the oracles against Israel, Judah, and the nations and the future king. This is where we get the prophetic nature of Isaiah, looking forward to the future. And then you have a portion of historical narrative of Hezekiah. Um, so you get multiple things going on here. So you'll have the temple vision, Isaiah 6. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is filled with his glory. Then you have like the prophetic children. This is Isaiah chapter 7. A lot of these are considered to be messianic. Isaiah 7, 9, and 11. Then you have oracles against nations, judgment of the whole earth, moving forward. Also continuing, because Isaiah is a larger book, you have the anticipation of hope and restoration, and then the servant songs. So maybe you've heard of Isaiah chapter 53. This is the suffering servant passage. Right here you see Isaiah 53, but there's multiple servant songs in Isaiah's book. Isaiah 53 happens to be the one that most often is cited when we're talking about the songs, and that would be the Song of the Suffering Servant. And then to end the book, life in the restored Jerusalem is much like life in the pre exilic Jerusalem, life like it was in the past, um, when it's renewed, when it's restored by God. Themes of the book of Isaiah, you have Yahweh as the Holy One of Israel. This is really huge, being found primarily in Isaiah 6. Then you have a survival of the remnant, uh, much like you might find in the conversation of the narrative, but the conversation between God and Elijah in the Old Testament historical narrative portion of the Bible in First Kings, going into Second Kings, but primarily the end of First Kings, where uh, Elijah is, you know, running away from Jezebel, and he is out, and you know, he's going to die, right? I- I'm the only one left, he says to God, and God said, "No, there's 7,000 that have not bowed knee to Baal or Baal." There, he speaks of a remnant, and Isaiah also speaks of the survival of a remnant. Then you have the Spirit of the Lord is also the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. Uh, Later, Jesus in the New Testament stands up and quotes from the book Isaiah, and he says that the Spirit of the Lord is upon me to preach good news to the captive, to the poor, and he is quoting back to the book of Isaiah. All right, and as far as the authorship of Isaiah is concerned, authorship and date, it looks like there's an 8th century Judean prophet relating Yahweh's universal reign over creation and the nations. So we're looking at an 8th century date for the Judean prophet relating to Yahweh. The one of the curious things or the interesting things about Isaiah is the fact that it's broken down into two, seemingly chapters 1 through 39 and chapters 40 through 66 have a noticeably different style, interest, and audience. And these scholars are saying that the first 39 verses seem to have an 8th century context, while chapters 40 through 55 seem to have a Babylonian context, and then chapters 56 through 66 seem to have a Persian context. So getting closer down in time frame toward the first century. Um, then you have the Syro-Ephraimite War, which relates to Syria or Aram and Israel in a conflict against Judah, resulting in the eventual destruction and deportation of northern Israel by the Neo-Syrian Empire. Then also in considerations you have, along with Deuteronomy and Psalms, Isaiah is the most often quoted book in the New Testament. These were big books to those who were Jewish in the first century, and they were big books to the prophetic nature of who the Messiah would be. That's why they're often, particularly Isaiah, quoted more because of the prophetic nature dealing with messianic prophecy as opposed to other ones. Then, as far as genre is concerned, there's many different genres that can be found in the book of Isaiah. Then you have poetic oracles, judgments, oracles of woe that function like funeral dirges. You have messages of salvation within that. You have love song. You have hymns of praise. You have messianic prophecies. You have the servant songs, and you have narrative. Looking at this, this is why sometimes it's very hard to read through portions of Old Testament like this, because there are so many genres that you're going in and out of. When you sit down and read a book, the vast majority of what you are reading is narrative. And we do well with narrative. Um, just to sit down and read what is the content of the book. But in the Bible, particularly these prophetic books, you're going in and out of different genres as you're reading along. So sometimes it's difficult to pop in and out of one. Um, so that's sometimes what might be the hindrance of reading through all of Scripture. The next one we're going to look at is Jeremiah, the weeping prophet. Jeremiah weeps over the condition of the nation and people of God. And that's why he's known as the weeping prophet. Of course, the big thing about Jeremiah is in all of his ministry, uh, no one turns from their ways, and he has no converts, one will say. The key passages from Jeremiah, we have Jeremiah's call, the prophetic call upon Jeremiah. He's called to do what he is going to do for God. We have the fact that Israel is guilty of breaking the covenant. Um, they have not been faithful to the covenant of God. Eh, The whole thing, you could track that whole theme all the way through the major and the minor prophets. The covenant people of God have broken their covenant with God. So there's a problem. And so that is a major theme, not only of Jeremiah, but also of all the prophets. You have the book of consolation found in Jeremiah 30 through 33. You have speaking of the new covenant. This covenant, of course, this is a little bit prophetic. This covenant is going to be um, established with Messiah. Christians will say that, of course, Messiah, Jesus. Of course, the Jewish people are still waiting on Messiah. This is an Old Testament class, so I do like to point that out. But New Covenant is brought up in Jeremiah 31 through 33 and 33. The fall of Jerusalem also brought up there. Uh, it is brought up in chapters 40 through 45, the major theme. Also, the oracles against nations. Again, Jeremiah, like Isaiah, like Amos, have oracles against the nations. Um, then, as far as authorship, we have the young prophet born to the priest Hilkiah. This is, and he's also from the lineage of Anathoth during the end of the second century. So we're trying to place it in a timeline, and this mention is from 1 Kings 2:26 through 27. Then you have the time frame of Jeremiah's ministry, which starts with the 13th year of the reign of Joash until the fall of Jerusalem. So the book is even telling us, giving us a heads up, placing it in a context. Some books do that, some books don't. But the books do, it's a lot easier to pinpoint a time frame. Then you also have Jeremiah's ministry witness. He witnesses the fall of Assyria, the death of Joash at the hands of the Egyptian Pharaoh Necho, then the rise of Nebuchadnezzar. This is Babylon, and then the king of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, which is Nebuchadnezzar. As far as genres are concerned, the major portion of Jeremiah is devoted to judgment oracles against Jerusalem and Judah, Judah and Jerusalem. That's chapters 1 through 25, verse 13. Then you have Jeremiah 30 through 33, demonstrate oracles of salvation. Again, you have these oracles. And then sections 26, chapters 26 through 29, and then 34 through 44 have biographical material as well as prophetic sign acts. And then ending, of course, with those oracles against the nations. Jeremiah. Now, how about Ezekiel? Ezekiel is a prophetic book. He's God's strong prophet. And when we look at the major prophets, particularly Jeremiah, we see those oracles against the nations, oracles about salvation, and we look at that in kind of a New Testament context, and we tend to focus in on what Jeremiah says about the new covenant. Then with Isaiah, we focus in on the messianic aspects, the prophecy concerning Messiah. With Ezekiel, it's not as clear cut as far as messianic prophecy or anything connecting to the New Testament. So, Ezekiel to us, um, if we're reading it through a New Covenant lens, Ezekiel is kind of passed over. But we'll get to the meat of what Ezekiel is talking about when we look at content and the authorship and the genre. Let's do that. Really, his emphasis is on Yahweh's transcendence and presence, as well as people's individual responsibility for sin. Um, Yahweh is great. Yahweh is big. Yahweh is strong. Yahweh is everywhere. Um, and he is not responsible for sin. The individual is responsible for sin. This is Ezekiel's um, great message and point of view as far as the content is concerned. Then, as a priest prophet, he is looking at the restoration of Jerusalem's temple, and purified lands, tribes is paramount. So, a purification. This is much like what's going on with Ezra and Nehemiah. Restoring the temple, purifying the nation. So, this is also what Ezekiel is concerned about. As far as authorship and date are concerned, we have an exiled priest who lived near the river Chebar in Babylon. He is a priest who takes on the prophetic role in light of the absence of the temple cult. Then you have many personal and public acts that are performative of how Yahweh had judged the people. So those are the things you take in consideration when looking at the authorship and date of Ezekiel. And then you have genre. So in this genre, we're kind of breaking down the book itself. Judgment on Judah and Jerusalem, much like what is spoken of in Jeremiah. A great deal of portion given to that. You have a prophet's call, like you do in Jeremiah. You have sign acts, also, like you do in Jeremiah. Oracles against the mountains of Israel, chapter 6. You have a complete end is decreed. It's going to be an end to all of it. The vision of judgment in Jerusalem. Oracles against Israel and Jerusalem. And see, often if you don't go back and read the Old Testament, you don't understand how often the prophets, when they came up against the people of God. Yes, there were, like Ezekiel has in chapters 25 through 32, oracles against the nations, but there's just as much given to the people of God as there are the oracles of the nations of the people around God. One of the books I love because of how it's outlined is the book of Amos, and how Amos gives out those oracles against the nations, and then he looks at Jerusalem, he looks at Israel, and he lays the hammer down, and he accuses them of harsher things than the nations which surround them, including Judah. But we'll get to that in a few weeks. You have oracles against the nations. You have the restoration for Israel and Judah. You have the restoration of Jerusalem, a new temple and land. And then uh, this is when you see LXX, what we're talking about there is a book called the Septuagint. It is the Greek translation of the Old Testament scriptures, Hebrew. So it's a Greek Old Testament. And in that particular book, Ezekiel is with Jeremiah and is shorter than the Masoretic text, another text of Ezekiel. Uh, so I hope that was helpful. Again, if you have any questions, please email me and I will be glad to answer. Thank you and have a wonderful day.